One of the quilt patterns that I have long admired is the Grandmother's Flower Garden, traditionally made with hundreds of tiny hexagons. I've only been able to admire this antique quilt knowing that I had never had the patience to stitch such a masterpiece. Then the thought came to me, why not supersize the block? With a few additional tweaks so that I don't have any Y seams, you can create hexagons with just straight stitching. This center, instead of being 1 inch, is now 6 inches along the sides, and you can make huge, impactful quilts. I'd like to share with you this fresh approach to patchwork, Grandmother's one-patch quilts. That's what's coming up next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
The hexagon shape can give you a variety of different pattern styles, and you just saw this antique quilt created by Ida Kant from West Bend, Wisconsin. She gave it to her niece Diane Dine, who's a good friend of mine, who loaned it to me today to show you. And it's a charming quilt. It looks like Black-Eyed Susan's to me, with the black center, of course the yellow outer edge, inner edge, and then a scrappy outer edge. This was all hand-pieced, hand-quilted. It's a work of love, and it's not quite finished, so Diane has a task ahead of her to finish this. I just want to show you by pulling this back that it has been hand-pieced together. All these, there's little hand stitches in here, and Ida stopped stitching right before the very edge. Now, here's a picture of Ida. She was born about 1890 or so, and humble woman, kind woman, and now her quilt gets a little national publicity, and I hope Ida's family can appreciate all the work that she did in this quilt and will enjoy it for a long time. Any hexagon quilt is generally created with Y seams. That's the term given where you have 3 intersections coming together. And this is the Y, or an inverted Y. Here's the Y seam, where the muslin, the blue print, and the blue and red print all come together at this intersection. Not an easy task to get all 3 areas together. We're going to create a hexagon, but a faux hexagon. We're not going to have any of these Y seams. I'll show this to you both on a type of a Grandmother's Flower Garden design, and also we're going to start off with an easier layout, and that is with a honeycomb design. But before I show you the honeycomb, I'm just going to enlarge that Y seam, or I've enlarged it to show you a bigger template. You know, the hexagon that I just showed you was about 1 inch finish, so the side was 1.5 inches. Here we have about a 3-inch finish, and this is that Y seam where the seams come together, and the sewer marked 1/4 of an inch from each edge when stop sewing, and start sewing 1/4 of an inch from each edge, and then meet it in the middle. It takes patience and takes accuracy, and truth be told, I'm not always that accurate. So this is the way I'd like to do that. And this honeycomb little table topper with hexagons, if you look at them from first blush, it looks like a traditional hexagon, but yet down the center of each of the hexagons is a seam. So we're going to create half hexagons to create this kind of faux look, the faux look of it. And I'll show you how it's done. Now you could cut a hexagon template in half and then add seam allowances, or you can find a faux hexagon shape that has 4 different sizes: 2-inch, 4, 6, and 8. And hexagons are always measured by the length of a side. So this is the 8-inch length, the 6-inch, 4, and 2. Not only will you be able to cut pieces this large, and you'll see quilts throughout this program of using pieces of this size. Here you can see the the 4 sizes. We'll also be cutting end pieces. Let me see if I can get it going in the right direction. Here you go. End pieces so that you can finish it off very easily. And that's also included in the template. And let me just show you that is an option. Here's this large 8-inch piece. And then there's an arrow from this point to a dotted line, and that becomes the piece. Let me flip it one more time. Here we go. Piece for the finished edge. And I'll show you what all this means. If you're going to make your own template, make a larger hexagon, because those itty-bitty hexagons would be even smaller as faux hexagons or half hexagons. So if you're wondering how this is going to go together, let me show you. On the template, it's written how wide to cut a strip, and we're going to use kind of traditional strip quilting techniques. And I'm going to take 3 colors from that honeycomb design and lay them out. So you have the fabrics cut, and I'm going to be cutting a 4-inch finished one. It's the one with the orange around it, and it tells me on the template to cut 4-inch wide strips. And then I'm just going to start by cutting the end pieces. So I'll just align the dotted edge with the end piece and mark. Now before I mark, I almost forgot this step, and the step is to do some pressing. I really do like to, after cutting my strips, add some not faux spray starch, but spray starch or an alternative starch to stiffen the fabric. It marks easier, sews better. I'm sure many of you have found this not a new technique, but just something you may want to consider doing. So starch it first, let it dry a little bit longer than I am. And then I'm going to first draw an end piece. Along the side, I'll just make it a little straighter. And then I'll flip this, align the mark that was just marked on the fabric, and draw the other side. Then flip it and draw. And you get the idea. You're just rotating this piece, and you're cutting these faux hexagons, half hexagons. Then we'll cut them apart and get a straight edge and a rotary cutter, and I'll move this over and we'll cut the end pieces, and then there's somewhat of a modified tumbler shape, but you get the general idea. And you can cut several at a time, and I've cut 3 layers at one time. After cutting, then take time to lay out your design. I pre-laid some rows out so that you can see what happens. And the end pieces are, I think they're very important, because then you don't have to finish a hexagon-shaped edge or a shape around the edge. I'm just going to lay row 1 out, and then row 2. You'll soon see how this comes together. Here's the hexagon, and it's in 2 pieces. And the honeycomb shape is starting to be a little bit more evident. Row 3 and 4 are soon to come. And these end pieces will form a portion of the hexagon. And you would just add row after row of pieces. And I'll just do a few right now to show you. Then after sewing, getting the columns or the rows, whatever you'd like to call them, I guess these are more columns, then do some pinning. And we're going to sew the sections together. And I'm just going to meet right sides together and put one little pin, and you're not going to match the edges. You're going to have that little bunny ear that will stick up about 1/4 of an inch, and you'll just place a pin on that piece. Then you'll meet the next piece right sides together, offset them by that little 1/4 of an inch. Place a pin, and then do the same for all of the other pieces. When we were creating some of the very large quilts that you'll see later on in the program, we would pin all one row, stitch it, and then bring it back to the layout area, then pin the next row. If you really want to be secure and sure of the layout, you may want to put little stickers on the rows, row 1, 2, 3, and 4. So as you might guess, now it's time to take this piece to the machine and do some stitching. Sometimes in quilting we do chain stitching. With this technique, we're just going to sew these seams to create a row or to create a column. And because the pieces are much larger, you don't need to worry about chain stitching. That little overlap by 1/4 of an inch, you'll get accustomed to just eyeballing that distance, and you'll see what a difference that makes when putting this together. So the setup of the machine is a straight stitch, and put on your favorite foot that gives you a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. I've put on a foot that has a single opening and then a guide so I can place the fabric right next to this edge, and use all-purpose thread, new needle, and you'll be ready to go. So straight stitch, that will have about 2.5 or 2.0 millimeter stitches per inch, and then just do the stitching. It's very simple because the Y seams are gone. They're all straight seams. So let me get these lined up and then I can go. There we are. And I come out just at that little area where the bunny ear comes out, and then I go to the next one, flip it open. Again, get it aligned. Take a second or two to make sure you have the right extension, and sew. If you've ever considered, I didn't see that pin, excuse me, let me get that out of there. I bet you never do that at home. There we go. If you've ever had a concern about creating a hexagon shape, this is the way to do it. And using these larger sizes really makes things go faster as well. I have 2 more seams to sew, and very simple to go about this. And since I placed the pin on the opposite side, just reach under, pull out that pin. Here comes that little extension again. I'm sewing right into the V of it, cut the threads, and we have 1 more seam to stitch. And this happens to have the end piece stitched to it. Take out the pin in advance and sew. Better line up these edges. And we have this mini row complete. Next is to do some pressing. Now this is maybe where I change a little bit from customary ways. I like to press these seams open. It saves some bulk, and you could press them to one side or the other, but right now I'm just going to press them open. When I do this, you may want to press it flat first. Somehow that always seems to set it and work a little bit better. And then just get the fabric pressed open, or finger press it open, which I'm doing right now, and then guide the iron down, and here we go, pretty fast. And the reason for doing this is that this next sample has all been pressed open. And we're going to be having these we're eliminating the Y seams and putting the columns together, and it just works a little better with those pressed open seams. So that maybe take just an extra second or 2 of time. Here are 2 strips that have been sewn. And you have 2 complete, or almost complete, hexagons. This one out of batik fabric and this green batik print. You can see the whole complete area once we get that seam together. So meet right sides together, pin the intersections. And you can match those little rabbit ears. It's just amazing. They match together, so it's not as detailed as you may think. So you just place a few pins through the middle, and then because we have the end pieces and they're exactly the right size, you just match the ends, the starting point and the ending point. And if you were accurate in your seams, it'll all come out, all with straight seams. Here the seam has been stitched, and if you kind of squint, you can't even tell that there is a seam down that middle. And especially when using prints, it kind of camouflages it. Let's take a final look at our table topper made with the hexagon shape, big, impactful honeycombs design, all made with just some straight stitching and a little planning. Traditional grandmother's flower garden quilts feature a meadow of blooms. With my supersizing technique, 1 bloom can make the entire quilt. Named after a dramatic flower, grandmother's dahlia was made with 6-inch faux hexagons. Again, the Y seams are a thing of the past, with straight stitching the only piecing option. Here I have the quilt on my table, the center hexagon with the yellow branches out with 3 rows of hexagons encircling that center area. And as I mentioned, it was a 6-inch size. The length of one side was 6 inches to create this center hexagon. And again, we use some of the end piecing techniques on the template to square off the quilt. I'm going to show you how this is laid out. Basically, I gave you the technique working with the honeycomb design. And we're going to cut shapes. Instead of working with 6 inches, we've cut the half hexagons or 4 hexagons in 4 inches, so they fit on my table a little bit better, but you'll get the concept of how this works. Here are the cutout pieces, and I'd like to start off with just the center piece. So you could lay this out on the floor or on a bed top and get your center design and separate them. And then we're going to create the hexagons around the center area. And you just keep on building, adding 2 sections all the way around. We've used batiks in this particular design, some of my favorite fabrics. They're high quality, they're fun to work with, beautiful design. But again, you could choose a variety of prints and styles. You'll see 2 other quilt designs later on, and we certainly have used a variety of options. So you get 1 ring around the center with a hexagon. You can see I'm getting them into rows. And then add the 2nd ring, 3rd ring, and then the end pieces. And I'm just going to kind of show you how this comes together. Lay them out so that exactly the way you lay it out is the way it's going to appear. And I'm not going to do the whole thing because I think you get the idea of what's going to happen. So after you would create entire rows, and you could add another section, kind of the path around the edge. Because I'm out of space, you would place the end pieces around at the end areas to finish it off. And then after doing all the placement, you'd pin the pieces together, the various rows. This would be row 3 as we are right now, kind of starting in the middle, and then you'd sew this entire row together. Well, I think you have that concept, but just to make sure, I'm going to show you the pieces that we have put together, and I'll quickly clean off my table. I have another quilt just waiting to be sewn here. And here I have a side piece, then the next one. All straight stitching would come next. And notice how the bloom, the dahlia flower, which is very large. Sometimes I've had in my garden a flower called the dinner plate dahlia. It's so big. This is kind of that size. As this is shaping, the next step would be to sew the straight seams, sewing these columns together. And it just appears in front of your eyes. So the very large quilt that we had finished was bigger than this, but you can get the concept. You can make this any size you'd like just by creating the rows, laying it out, sewing the stitches together. Well, you don't have to go this large. You could go much smaller. And another idea is to use fabrics that were reproduction fabrics. These are from the 1930s. You see 3 blooms diagonally across with portions of the blooms. Just fill in the areas and then add end pieces. Not difficult at all. It's really enjoyable to lay it out. When we were laying this out in our sewing studio, we had a lot of fun mix and matching the fabrics. And then for our most dramatic look, we have grandmother's supersized bouquet. This time using the 8-inch faux hexagon piece, a very large piece to make a queen-size bed. We used fabrics that have influence of oriental feel to them. Portions of the blooms intermix with each other, intertwine. It's a real dramatic look. You have a lot of fun laying it out and being creative. Make sure that you have an area on your floor or working on a bed sheet to do the layout so that all comes together. Regardless if you're working with small, such as a 2-inch or a 4-inch or 6 or even that 8-inch as that supersized bouquet design showed you, you just have to cut the pieces and then lay them out. Take time to enjoy the process of creating a hexagon shape without putting together any Y-seams. Many of us have admired antique grandmother's flower garden quilt patterns, only wishing the quilter had taken time to write down the story behind the quilt. Since we don't have the history of Ida Kant's quilt that you saw in today's program, I can only guess on some of the background. A person that has made it her job to be a quilt detective is with us today. Welcome Carol Butsky. Carol is an AQS certified quilt appraiser and quilt historian. She's been with us before on Sewing with Nancy and is back again to give us some insight into her antique grandmother's flower garden quilts. How appropriate that you're here today, Carol. And sometimes when I think of flower garden quilts, I think 1930s, 1940s.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. But this is the pattern that we probably most recognize as one of the vintage patterns that we grew up with through our mothers and our grandmothers. But it has an even longer history than that. Probably going back even as before we even know, but 1700s, we know that there are quilts in England that were using this particular pattern, and they were known as mosaics or honeycomb patterns. Slightly different than what we utilize today in Grandmother's Flower Garden, but certainly it's been around for a long time and a dearly beloved pattern. It was the first pattern that was ever publicized in a lady's book, in Godey's Ladies Book, and it was in 1835. And it said it was an ingenious and very pretty pattern.
Oh,
so,
that it is.
And still we enjoy it today.
Traditionally, the motifs are put together in, sometimes you mentioned a center, yellow center.
Yellow centers is the more traditional way that we would expect to see them, but as you can see, this one has a variety of colors. So women certainly had a way that they could make it their very own. Followed certainly by a round of solids, which is most often what we see, and then a round of prints. What is between the blocks often is a single, or in this case, a double garden pathway. It can be more likely than not either white or green is the most traditional, but I've seen them in red, I've seen them in black, I've seen them in blue. So women's creativity comes through.
And we say double because there are two offset rows of hexagons in this area instead of just one. There you can see them. All hand-pieced,
hand-pieced,
hand-quilted, and then the border was finished by following the edge of the design. This is a labor of love.
Definitely is. It took a tremendous amount of time, but it was something they could do on their laps in the evening doing the hand sewing. And I always say on an appraisal day that I'm almost always will come across a grandmother's flower quilt or a top, because oftentimes they weren't finished because women didn't quite know what to do with the edge.
Yeah, this was maybe more daunting than they wanted.
I think so.
A less daunting option maybe would be to work with a honeycomb, or like you have right here, a bullseye quilt.
The bullseye quilt is from around 1900, circa 1900. It is a charm quilt, meaning that every piece of fabric in that particular quilt is a different piece of fabric. So the lady was a collector, whether she exchanged them with friends and family, but it seems to be more likely that she had a source book or a salesman's book of fabrics that she worked from, because there will be as many as 5 of the same fabric pattern, but in different colorways. So it's kind of fun to look at and explore.
It is. The combination and the gradation of the reds, for example, lovely collections. So I'm thinking I'm with you. Not that I know that much about antique quilts, but they must have been positioned together at one time. So you have taken your hand at, I know you're a great hand quilter, and you did, but this time you happened to piece this by machine.
I did, and it was probably made in the 1990s, somewhere along the way. But it has a variety of blossoms, which are a single round around a yellow center. That's a print, but it has a little garden fence around the garden.
And then notice the blooms. We've seen a lot of variety of grandmother's flower garden quilts today, but the blooms, we have 4 of one color and then a darker shade. You've done that all the way around, so I like that look, just a little extra shading effect. And then, this is very sweet, just the little picket fence around the top and then prairie points to finish the edge. Well, thank you for sharing with us, Carol, the history of grandmother's flower garden quilts, charm quilts, and being with us to tell the story.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. If you would like to find out more information from Carol, you can go to www.nancyzieman.com and you'll find links to Nancy's Corner, Carol, as well as all my other guests that you've watched on Sewing with Nancy. Plus, you'll be able to watch Sewing with Nancy programs online, streaming online, read my blog, and basically, you'll be directed to all things Sewing with Nancy. Thank you for being with us on this two-part series on grandmother's flower garden patchwork quilts, as well as tumblers. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.
Nancy has written instructions and designed templates that can be used to create the quilts featured in this series. They're $19.99 plus shipping and handling. To order this reference material, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2506. Order item number CL9525, Grandmother's One Patch Quilts Templates. Credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at nancyzieman.com to see additional episodes, Nancy's blog, and more. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Class A Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Rowenta. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.